we did recover the remains of missing 12-year-old Lori Paige.
A missing little girl has been found dead. Her name was Lori Paige, and she was only 12 years old. She disappeared without a trace. Her father was the one who first reported her missing, but now that same man is behind bars, charged with her murder.
I told you 2 years ago that we would find who did this, and we would arrest them and bring them to justice. And today, I stand before you to tell you we have done just that.
Now Lori can rest in peace, and the man accused of stealing her young life is sitting in a jail cell. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the details. You may be asking, how does a story like this begin? How does a father go from searching for his daughter to being accused of taking her life? To find those answers, we have to go back to Tallahassee, Florida. It's summer, June 3rd, 2023. The sun is out, kids are playing, and somewhere in the middle of it all, a little girl named Lori vanished. Her father, Andrew Wiley, was the one who called police. He claimed Lori left home sometime overnight with her backpack while he was at work. But behind the scenes, investigators say his story did not sit right, and over time, it only got worse. Within the first year of her disappearance, detectives still had no sign of Lori, and Wiley's version of events were allegedly starting to fall apart. According to the Tallahassee Democrat, Lori had been living a troubled life long before she went missing. A teacher described her as kind, intelligent, and attentive in class, but behind her good grades and polite smile was a quiet sadness. A school paraprofessional told the paper that Lori had previously been in custody of the Department of Children and Families. In just 1 month before she disappeared, she reportedly ran away from home. She was later found at an apartment complex pool. One teacher reportedly recalled one time Lori showed up to school barefoot. Her father was called, and he came to get her. When Lori disappeared, it rattled the community. Search efforts kicked into high gear, but still no trace. Month after month passed. The FBI even offered a $15,000 reward for any information that might bring her home. They knocked on doors across 3 different states where Lori had family. They brought in cadaver dogs, but still nothing. 8 months into the search, and the Tallahassee Police Department launched a grid search. That means investigators methodically combed through a large stretch of land, one section at a time. Dozens of officers and firefighters joined the effort. It was the 5th time they'd searched that same area, but this time they had more hands. Police said there were a few unique challenges in Lori's case. Like, she only lived in Tallahassee for about a year, so she hadn't formed many routines or relationships that could help detectives. Next, she vanished during the summer, which meant no school patterns to track. And perhaps the most difficult obstacle, she didn't have a cell phone. So that means no digital footprint, no pings, and no social media. But then everything changed.
We have recovered Lori's remains, and we have arrested the person responsible.
12-year-old Lori Paige had been found. She was dead, and the person accused of killing her was her own father.
After a comprehensive and exhaustive 22-month investigation into the disappearance of 12-year-old Lori Paige, the Tallahassee Police Department has arrested her father, 36-year-old Andrew Wiley, on the charges of second-degree murder.
Police say the case cracked open as Wiley's story continued to shift. And then key developments that investigators say changed everything. Listen to what Chief Lawrence Revel describes as key developments which ultimately led to Wiley's arrest.
February 2nd, 2024, a phone is seized from Wiley's residence. A forensic analysis uncovers questionable internet searches, including queries about remote areas with bodies of water in Alabama and Georgia. March 2024, as more consistencies in Wiley's statements are identified and new information about his relationship with Lori emerges, detectives shift their focus more heavily towards Wiley. Early 2024, based on digital evidence, detectives begin searching a remote, brush-covered area of Thomas County, Georgia, known locally as a plantation. Multiple searches are conducted but yield no results. April 5th, 2025, following a prescribed burn that cleared heavy brush in the area, detectives returned to the plantation for another search. This time, they located human remains. The remains are processed by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, again, like I said, in 4 days. and positively identified as those of Lori Paige.
I want to thank Odoo for sponsoring this news package. Odoo is an incredible all-in-one business management software that provides you with a range of applications. One of my favorite Odoo applications is their Projects app. Managing projects can be tough, but with Odoo's Projects app, it truly does not have to be. Need a clear timeline? Well, the Gantt view maps out your tasks and helps you stay on track. Prefer a more flexible approach? The Kanban view lets you move tasks easily from to do to done. Or if you like structure, the list view gives you all the details at a glance. Plus, Odoo's comprehensive dashboard keeps you updated on task status, activities, and remaining time, so you're always in control. And with powerful reporting tools, you can track your project's budget, milestones, and profitability in real time. Odoo Projects app helps you stay organized, meet deadlines, and boost productivity. So right now, you can get a free 15-day trial of Odoo's all-in-one business solution and see how it can make your life easier. Scan the QR code on your screen or check it out at our link, odoo.com/LC News Project. Grim news: a little girl's life cut short and discovered only when it was far too late. While nothing could bring Lori back, police say they were grateful to finally bring closure to a case that had haunted Tallahassee for nearly 2 years.
Lori deserves a safe home and a full life. While today's arrest will never bring her back, it does bring us one step closer to justice.
That justice, according to court documents obtained by WCTV, began unraveling the very day before Wiley reported his daughter missing. Detectives say Wiley made preparations to flee. He allegedly purchased a one-way ticket from Jacksonville to Puerto Rico. Phone records show he traveled to Jacksonville the night of June 2nd, just hours before Lori was reportedly missing. But then, for reasons still unclear, he turned around and went back to Tallahassee. But that's not all. Investigators claim Wiley's purchases leading up to Lori's disappearance point to a disturbing possibility. Evidence suggests there may have been abuse, potentially of a sexual nature. Wiley is also accused of destroying his electronic devices to cover his tracks. Then, in February 2024, police brought him back in for questioning. When they asked him about the week Lori vanished, he reportedly said he could not remember. That same month, investigators searched Wiley's vehicle. They found a pistol, ammunition, and a bottle of cleaning fluid, one that specifically claimed it could clean or remove blood. The vehicle's carpet was sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Crime Lab. It tested positive for Lori Paige's blood. But the court documents did not stop there. They painted a heartbreaking picture of Lori's young life. Records show Lori experienced deep depression. She reportedly resented her parents, possibly for what she endured at home. Documents claim she was often left alone for hours at a time in both of her parents' homes without supervision. Originally, Lori's parents shared custody, but prior to the 2022-23 school year, her mother gave up custody. From that point on, Lori lived solely with her father, and less than a year later, she was gone. Now, as Andrew Wiley sits behind bars accused of murdering his own daughter, his family is fighting back. They've launched a GoFundMe page claiming he's been falsely accused. They're trying to raise $100,000 for his legal defense. At the time of this recording, they've raised just $50. And joining me to talk more about this is legal expert Melba Pearson. Melba, thank you so much for coming on today. Let's dive right in. What does a second-degree murder charge typically mean in a case like this?
Yeah, so great to be on with you as always, Kennedy. And so this is a case out of the state of Florida. And so second-degree murder in the state of Florida usually means that, number one, there was no premeditation. And so with the lack of premeditation, that's what brings it down to second-degree murder versus first-degree premeditated murder. Now, this also could mean that it was a reckless act of some sort. It could also mean heat of passion. So in other words, you did not intend to kill someone, but obviously whether it be Again, we don't know what the autopsy will say in terms of what injuries the poor child sustained, but was it a matter of a beating that resulted in death or something along those lines? Those are all types of actions that would result in a second-degree murder charge. It still would be facing life in prison, and there's also enhancers because of the fact that it is a child that is involved. The child is a victim, but again, we're looking at life in prison. This is not a death penalty type of case in the state of Florida.
And I know we're waiting on the young girl's autopsy, but how does the prosecution potentially prove intent without a direct witness?
Well, it's going to have to be looking at circumstantial evidence as well as digital evidence and the physical evidence that will be gleaned from the victim's body. So, number one, looking at the injuries. Was it, and again, I do not like to be morbid about this sort of thing, but was it strangulation? Was it a beating? All of that can kind of the body will tell the story generally as to what happened. Was there a pattern of abuse? And that's something that the prosecution will be looking at. Has there been prior police calls to the residents? Do the fellow classmates or does the teachers at the child's school have some input in terms of they saw her with bruises or something along those lines? That kind of evidence is going to be very important. Also, the digital evidence. So looking at, and one of the things that became very critical in making this arrest was his internet searches where he was looking for, wooded areas and places to hide a body. That's going to be incredibly critical. What other things was he searching for? Is this a situation where he wanted to start his life over without his child? You could be looking at let's say if he has a girlfriend or a partner, a boyfriend, something in another city or whatever the case may be, and there's correspondence back and forth, and there was deadline of, hey, I need you to start a life with me by Friday or else. We've seen cases like that before. Did the homicide ended up happening during that time frame? So again, lots of speculation here, but these are some of the examples of the types of evidence that the prosecution will be looking for to help bolster their case.
Can you walk us through what happens legally once human remains are positively identified?
Well, first off, there would have to be notifications made to the surviving family members. Even though the defendant is the father arrested in this case, there still may be a mother that's alive. There still may be other relatives that would want to know what happened to their loved one. So that would be the first thing. And then once the remains have been identified, then the remains then get turned over to the coroner's office, the medical examiner, where they're going to conduct an autopsy and figure out what the cause of death is. Now, there is a possibility, depending on how long the remains were hidden and the types of conditions. So was it really hot? Was it very swampy? That, of course, contributes to decomposition, which sometimes makes it harder to determine what the cause of death is. But again, you may be able to see based on the bones, based on, the toxicology report. Let's say, was there something in the child's blood that could be indicative of how they died? All of those things will be analyzed. So once the autopsy is complete, then the prosecution can then move forward in determining what the theory of the case is going to be, and then continue to work with law enforcement to get the relevant evidence that will be needed in order to move the case forward.
Now, I know you're not a coroner, but realistically, would they be able to find all of those things if the body, it's been 2 years since anyone last saw her?
Well, again, it depends on the condition of her body. It also depends on when she was left there. Again, if it may have been 2 years, but maybe she was not in that same location the entire 2 years. We don't know. So there's a possibility that if she had been in a different location, that may have slowed decomposition down. That's a possibility. But if not, and if decomposition sadly did set in, again, if there are some tissue samples that are left, that can be tested to get some idea as to what was going on with her body at the time of the homicide. And then again, if, in terms of, let's say, strangulation, if there's at least some bones in her neck that are still intact, that might be able to show if she was strangled. So, again, there's different options available, but again, it's all going to depend on what condition her body was when she was found.
Now let's, move on to the digital forensics. According to court documents, police are claiming that there were internet searches, phone records that they used, and that's how they were able to, accuse the father of this crime. How important are the digital forensics in in this modern day investigation?
Listen, forensics are everything at this point. Digital forensics are everything. Your internet searches and your phone will tell on you. Siri is very quick to tell on you. And so people often think, oh, if I just turn off my phone, I'm not going to be able to be tracked. But there's other ways that you can be tracked. Also, again, if you're searching how to get it with murder, what sorts of places should I leave a body, things like that. Well, that's clearly showing your state of mind and that this is something that you planned. Maybe the homicide wasn't planned, but the hiding of the body afterwards is clearly being planned. So all of that's going to be critical. And then, of course, your social media footprint. Are you posting with your child? Or, for instance, if during the time that your child was missing, how often did you post on social media appealing for information, things like that? If you weren't very vocal and visible in this investigation in trying to find your child, why is that? So all of those things will be critical pieces for the jury to understand what happened in the days leading up to the poor child's disappearance, and then subsequently during the time that she was missing for those 2 years.
And police claim that the suspect made internet searches, allegedly searching things about remote areas with large bodies of water. Can internet searches alone be used as evidence in court? And if so, can't the defense just come back and say that he was looking for something else?
Absolutely, and that's why all the evidence comes together, almost like making a cake, right? Like you can't just have one ingredient and think you're going to have a great end result. It takes a number of different ingredients. So you would have the medical examiner's report. You would have the lead detective talking about the investigation they conducted. You would have the digital expert looking at the searches and trying to explain the time frames and how that matched up. You would be looking for school records and hospital records to see if there's a history of abuse, things like that. So I would not let my case rise and fall solely just on the digital evidence, but it can play a critical role in moving the case forward.
What challenges do investigators face when remains are found so long after the death?
Again, it goes back to the ability of the medical examiner to determine the cause of death. The worst finding you could get is basically undetermined. Because at that point, when the coroner makes the finding, and we use the term coroner and medical examiner interchangeably, means the same thing. But when you do get that finding of undetermined, that means the defense can say, oh, it wasn't a homicide, it was an accident. And then the prosecution has an uphill battle to have to show how beyond a reasonable doubt that this was a homicide. So the decomposition becomes very much a problem. And of course, again, hate to be morbid, but if you're left in a wooded area, you have to worry about wildlife and your remains being scattered that way. And so if you don't have the body intact, key evidence ends up getting lost. So it makes it harder to necessarily pin down what the cause of death is.
Yeah, such a tragic, tragic story. We know that, according to the court documents, again, police claim to have found cleaning products in the suspect's car. Allegedly, those cleaning products could be used to clean blood. That's what they were for. Can cleaning products be considered incriminating evidence?
It can, but again, not in a vacuum. It has to be part of the broader investigation and part of the broader story as to how all of this came to be. So again, if it's a situation where it's the day that the child went missing is when we believe that the homicide occurred, well, then we'll be backtracking from there to see what happened during that time frame. Did he go to a big box store and buy all of these cleaning supplies and a tarp as well? I mean, all of these things become factors in terms of figuring out what happened and explaining the chronology and explaining the child's last days on this earth.
Now, police say that they interviewed the father several times. Why would someone be re-interviewed months later? And what's the legal strategy behind that?
Well, first of all, you get interviewed initially when there's an issue, a criminal act, or you're reporting someone missing. There's always an initial interview. But then subsequent interviews become necessary because as the investigation progresses, new facts may come to light, new questions may come to light. And so as a result of that, you go back and you go to the father and say, okay, well, we heard that the child was seen here, or we heard that there was some abuse. Can you answer this? Can you explain what color the backpack was, or something along those lines? Was something recovered along the way? Then you want to go back to the family member and find out, can you identify this? Did this belong to the victim? Is it in the same condition that it was when it left the house, that sort of thing, because all of that again will play a role in determining, was what happened along the way. So that is not unusual. Now, of course, if your story starts to change, that of course raises an alert with law enforcement, because again, the truth never changes. The truth is a truth is a truth. So if your story keeps shifting, then they're going to keep re-interviewing you, because now you're getting caught in lies repeatedly, and they want to know, why are you lying? What do you have to hide? And so they're going to keep coming back to you, especially as more facts and more evidence come to light, and keep locking you into that story, so that eventually when you end up getting arrested and going to trial, now you have a multitude of different scenarios that you've presented. And of course the prosecution can say, well, what part is the truth? Was it the initial story? Was it the third story? Or is it what you're saying in court today? That becomes a very classic impeachment tactic during the course of trial.
Yeah, and speaking of that, investigators did say that the suspect's story had inconsistencies. But I guess my question to you would be, if his daughter did go missing 2 years ago, is that normal to not remember exactly what you told the police a couple years prior? Or in a situation like this, it's hard to believe that someone with a missing child would forget certain details?
Well, again, it depends on which details. So if it's something relatively minor, as in maybe your time frame was off by 5 or 10 minutes, okay, that's something that could be explained. But if now we're looking at a situation where you're saying, well, I was on this part of town, and then now you come back and you're saying, actually, I was someplace else, that starts to look suspect. Starts to look sketchy. So it depends on the type of details that have somewhat changed. And of course, when you think about the loss of a child, that's usually an event that's very much seared in your memory. So a lot of things, at least in, common sense, would say certain things would be almost like frozen in time, as in the last time you saw them, you're always going to remember that and try to keep that moment fresh in your mind, because again, as you're grieving, you're going to be looking back to that moment of, was there something I missed? Was there something else I should have done? Was there any signs? Or did my child say something that I just blew off and could have done something differently? I mean, a lot of times you see family members of folks that have gone missing, folks that have been, let's say murdered as a result of domestic violence. They keep playing the tape back in their head to figure out if there was something they could have done differently, and sometimes often beating themselves up about it. So clearly this was missing here. And so those are the types of things that investigators would be looking for.
And so next, let's switch gears to the defense. How does the defense typically counter digital and forensic evidence like this?
Of course, they're going to say that there may be another explanation for why you're searching for those things, that you're in school and you were researching a project, or you saw something on Law&Crime and you decided to Google it, or something along those lines. And they're going to say that, clearly this doesn't show that the person's a murderer. And of course, they'll try to say that maybe they're not the only person that has access to that particular device. Now, that can become difficult, especially if you're the only one who lives in the house. But if this was, multiple people living in the household, sometimes you end up, blaming one of the kids or something like that to say, hey, I'm not the only person that has access to the search engine. And now you have to kind of dig deeper into time frames and use that to corroborate whether or not it was the defendant that was looking, or if it could, in fact, be someone else.
Is there a chance that his defense team could argue wrongful arrest or, even mishandled evidence?
Of course, defense can argue anything they want. Doesn't mean it's going to be effective, but they can definitely argue that, well, this was a rush to judgment and, the police department couldn't find any other suspects. So they went back to the father who, had reported his child missing. If he was really a murderer, would he have reported his child missing at all? He probably wouldn't have said anything. Those types of arguments would be normal to see in this type of case.
Now, there was a report saying that the family allegedly had a case, or, little Lori Paige had a case with the Department of Children and Families. How could prior involvement with the Department of Children and Families affect this?
Well, it could be very telling as to why DCF, Department of Children and Families, got involved. Was there, again, allegations of abuse? Was there allegations of the child was starving, going to school dirty, things like that? Was the child removed from the house? Was there drug use in the house? There's so many questions and so many reasons why DCF could have gotten involved. And so, again, if this was an unstable household, why was it unstable? Was it a result of the father's actions? All of these would then possibly feed into motive, or at least feed into having an explanation as to how and why this even came to be.
If convicted, what sentence could the suspect be facing?
He would be facing life. He would be facing life in prison.
Is there any opportunity for a plea deal in this case, or usually with second-degree murder, they don't really plead down?
There's always the opportunity for a plea. Again, depending on the strength of the prosecution's evidence, depending on what the coroner's findings are, all of those things will weigh into the strength and the weaknesses of the case. And obviously, if it's something that can go either way, oftentimes a plea agreement may be the best way to go. Also, the defendant may not want to roll the dice and go to trial and just might be like, you know what? I've been caught on this. Let me just see if a 25-year plea is an option. Again, I believe he's 36 years old, so that could give him the opportunity to be, out and live some portion of his life on the outside before, the end. But, again, if the prosecutor is very strong and feels that their facts and their case is very strong, they may not want to offer a deal, or maybe the plea is life and that's it.
Well, it seems as if the suspect is maintaining his innocence. His family created a GoFundMe page where they are trying to raise money for, a defense attorney. How long could this take? Like, what does a typical trial timeline look like for a case like this?
Usually it would maybe be like 2 to 3 years, again, because of the all the evidence that needs to be gathered. The decomposition might be a huge factor. Obviously, in Florida, we have depositions, so there's that opportunity for the defense counsel to do more investigation, bring in witnesses, investigate any alibi that the defendant may bring forth. And so all of that does take time. And so 2 to 3 years would be pretty much a normal range for this type of case.
Great. Well, this is a story that we will definitely be following. Thank you so much, Melba, for joining us today.
Thank you, Kennedy.
Wiley was denied bond on his second-degree murder charge. He is barred from having contact with several of his family members. For Law and Crime News, I'm Kennedi Walker.